Section 3 of Mice and Men. So as per usual, Steinbeck starts with cinematic techniques, and he describes the bunkhouse as it's going dark, which is what it's using here, dusk, and that is where the sun is setting. Now obviously with the sun setting and things going dark, it suggests a connotation of perhaps being quite foreboding. And that's important because at the end of section 3, there's an unpleasant fight between Curly and Lenny. When you're looking at cinematic techniques, even if it's a short bit, make sure that you're looking for any connotations or writing techniques where possible. And when it gets into dialogue, that speeds up the pace of the narrative, so it might encourage something like tension. On page 43 in the Brown book, I'm always using the Brown book because in our school, this is what you'll have in the exam. Obviously without my notes in it, just to let you know. George begins to describe Lenny, and he says basically that Lenny's very competent when, on the ranch. He can't think for himself, but he sure can take orders, and it shows that he will follow others. Again, suggesting that childlike quality that Lenny has. And Slim, who politely sort of says that funny how you and him strung along together. And it suggests that unique relationship that George and Lenny have in 1930s America. Every man was for himself. It wasn't a time where people looked out for each other. So the fact that George and Lenny do this is unique. Unfortunately, George becomes a bit defensive, and it really sort of sums up the 1930s way of thinking in America at that time, where Slim says, "I hardly never seen two guys travel together." And you can use that can be an embedded quotation if you want to use that to show the unique relationship. And it also is quite funny how clearly George is being very blunt there, and he's protective of the relationship that he has with Lenny, much like a parent would with a child. It's cute. Don't write cute. Right, so moving on. Page 44. Page 44. So because Slim has this almost, and I quote again, godlike personality and the way he interacts with the other workers, George starts to open up to Slim and talks about how when he was first looking after Lenny, he almost used to get him to do things for his own entertainment. And it's almost like he's confessing to him. Oh, look, there's the godlike. There it is. Definitely embed that quotation if you can, if you're talking about Slim. And it's talking about how he would make Lenny do things that he couldn't do, such as jump in a lake, and he couldn't swim, bless him. It also shows how Lenny has always done everything that George has asked him to do, which is certainly a cataphoric reference in terms of what is about to happen at the end of section 3. If you're not sure what that is, you probably should have read it a few more times. And what's interesting about Slim is Slim doesn't judge George, nor does he judge Lenny. What Slim says is guys don't need no sense to be a nice fella. And I've written an excellent quotation to describe Lenny. And it is because it shows that he does struggle in the adult world, but he is someone who is nice and kind. And it also shows that Slim himself, he values those qualities. He values people being nice to each other, which again makes him unique. Perhaps that's why he's held in such high esteem on the ranch. So we move to page 45, and the main thing I want to point out on page 45 is where George tells Slim about weed. Now, obviously that is not the drug, people. We're talking about a town in America before anyone makes any silly remarks. And he's talking about why they had to leave weed, and Lenny has seen this girl in the red dress, and he has clearly liked the material of the dress, and he just holds on like a child does. If you've ever held a little baby, quite often that they pull at your hair. If you've got earrings or a necklace, they try and pull it, and it just shows that childlike quality that he has. Page 46. They continue talking about the moment in Weed, Slim is clearly quite surprised by what George has said, and he confirms, "Didn't hurt the girl, that nun, huh?" he asks finally. "Hell no, he just scared her." And of course this is a cataphoric reference to section 5. We have a description, and therefore we have to be looking for connotations and writing techniques, and we found a simile here. This is where Lenny comes through the door and he puts his denim coat over his shoulders like a cape. And again, it gives him that childlike quality, almost as if he cannot be detected and what he is doing is totally undetectable. And of course, he is bringing the puppy in. What a naughty chap. Page 47 shows Lenny's childlike quality when George is making him give the puppy back and put it back in the barn. Lenny is quite upset about it, and it really shows that he is very childlike. This is supported by old Slim saying, "He's just like a kid, ain't he?" Now that is a really good quotation to use. The likelihood of an extract or essay question involving Lenny is extremely high. And therefore, at some point, you are likely to be writing about how Lenny struggles in the adult world and he is childlike. Having something like this to embed and back up what you're saying would be a very good idea, even if it's not this particular extract. So that is a good one to remember. Again, old Candy is reinforced. Poor Candy. Page 48. I've written here, Candy is vulnerable and disadvantaged, just like the dog. Disadvantaged means that some of the characters do not have the opportunities that the other characters have. So, for example, Candy is disadvantaged because of his age. Lenny is disadvantaged because he struggles in an adult world. Curly's wife is disadvantaged because she's the only female on the ranch and very lonely. Crooks is disadvantaged because of his colour and the segregation that brings. So there are fair few disadvantaged characters. References to 1930s here. Again, you'll notice the same kind of things are coming up. So the words used suggesting that segregation, status, power and hierarchy on the ranch. Also, Carlson is starting to become very opinionated, and it's showing that his own needs are more important than the way that Candy feels, which is very reflective of 1930s America, every man for himself. On page 49, we have the theme of companionship and loneliness. Carlson is desperately trying to persuade Candy to shoot the dog. Candy is very uncomfortable because he is the only person that stays behind when the others go to work in the fields because he is the swamper. Therefore, the dog is his only companion, and if the dog is shot, obviously that companionship is removed. Carlson tries to encourage Candy. Again, it shows that he is more dominant, and you can use that quotation from section 2 that we just went through about Carlson being sort of a more dominant personality and overpowering other members of the ranch. Ooh, pages are stuck. Page 50. This is a really emotional moment, and I think that Steinbeck is deliberately being empathetic. Empathetic means where he is creating a moment that a reader can relate to and be able to feel what the person is feeling, the character is feeling. And obviously making it something quite broad, like a dog or something, obviously people can relate to pets dying. It makes it a very empathetic moment. And he's looking from face to face, the ranch workers, desperately trying to get them to help him in standing up to Carlson. And again, it shows that sort of 1930s attitude where every man was for himself, own needs come above those of others, and nobody is helping Candy, even though he's pleading with them by looking at them, desperately trying to get them to help. Eventually, someone tries to change the subject, and this bit is just about, the ranchmen talking about a magazine they were reading, and someone who worked at the ranch a while ago had written in, and they're just desperately trying to change the subject to help poor Candy. Jumping to page 52, Candy is still trying to dissuade Carlson from shooting his dog. He says, maybe tomorrow, let's wait until tomorrow. And it shows the companionship that he has between himself and his dog. It shows the theme of loneliness. And again, it shows the 1930s way of thinking, people out for themselves and, so, really thinking about their own needs. Looking at this section, this is where Carlson has got his own way and the dog is led out to be shot. Now you'll notice the repetition of gently here almost gives a sense of calm before the death, and the death is obviously a cataphoric reference. We've had the death of the mouse, now we've had the death of the dog, we then have the death of the puppy at the beginning of section 5, the death of Curly's wife at the end of section 5, and the death of Lenny in section 6. So we do have the theme of death that runs through this novel. The fact that apologetically is used here is interesting because he's almost sorry to Candy at this moment, but not enough to consider Candy's feelings. The next bit really establishes the tension whilst Candy and the men wait to hear the shot and the confirmation of the dog being shot. So silence is used many times to establish that tension. Almost people don't know what to say, that sort of sense of pausing. There is description, and remember, if there's a description at any point, you look for connotations of words or writing techniques. And they're talking about the silence, and Steinbeck says, it came out of the night and invaded the room. That description is a metaphor, and it really suggests the tension that the men don't know what to do to make this better. So they decide to play a card game. Again, we have description at the end, and it's a gnawing sound, so a mouse or a rat under the floor, and that sort of basic noise, that sort of quiet noise, is almost breaking that tension that has been established by the dog leaving with Carlson. Hence the word gratefully there, it breaks the tension. Then we have a very simple sentence when it says a shot sounded in the distance. A simple sentence is the same as a short sentence, and that creates tension. It is what they've been waiting for, what they've been waiting to hear. Obviously, Candy is very upset. On page 55, I said 35, we're going backwards. No! Mr. Slim is referred to by Crooks, and that shows his status and hierarchy. The fact that Crooks, obviously the bottom of the pile in terms of hierarchy, is referring to Slim as Mr. Slim. This is still while Candy is upset. And then we have some cataphoric references. Again, one of those things that if you get this as an extract, you can mention it, but it's not something that I would necessarily embed. And it's about Slim discussing Lenny and playing with the puppies, and Crooks has basically come in to say that Lenny is picking the puppies up, which is something he probably shouldn't be doing when they're so young, and Slim says he won't hurt him. It's a cataphoric reference to, of course, the death of the puppy, but also the death of Curly's wife in section 6. And then we have the very end of page 55. We're discussing Curly's wife again. Please notice the apostrophe of Curly's because she is the wife belonging to Curly. And whilst I mention this, she is called Curly's wife and she does not have a name because she is the property of Curly. Again, that is something really, really important to mention as it reflects 1930s America. It shows the sort of hierarchy in society. Women were below men in terms of social hierarchy. She was his property. And it also emphasises the fact she is the only female on the ranch. But if you get anything with Curly's wife, or you mention Curly's wife, it is very important to mention that is why she does not have a name. It's because she's the property of Curly, and therefore it reflects the social hierarchy in 1930s America. Do not forget that, minions. Page 56, the connotations of Lulu. They're discussing Curly's wife, and they're saying that she's, you know, pretty mad and that she's, you know, not all there. But actually it's because she's lonely. And they're sort of making fun of her, and they say, I bet she even gives the stable buck the eye. I don't know what the hell she wants. They think she's insane because of her behaviour. They think she's flirtatious. But of course, Steinbeck reveals in section 5 that she is simply lonely, and she's physically portraying her dream of becoming an actress. That continues throughout page 56, that she's flirtatious, but actually she's lonely. And then this bit is interesting, and this is the kind of thing you might want to write down to embed, because it really shows that she's the only female on the ranch. And again, that shows the 1930s America status, hierarchy, social status. Page 57. At the top of page 57, it shows the way the men spend their time and money, or waste time and money. And they're talking about the brothels that they visit. Now, brothels is something, I'm not sure many of you will understand this. Well, some of you might actually. Where prostitutes would be, where they could get a drink and, you know, do the deed and pay for it and go home. And that's what they were spending their money on, which is why they never escaped from ranch life, because they would work on the farm, they would work on the ranch a week, and then go to old Susie's and spend their money. However, George is different to them. George doesn't do that, because he and Lenny are saving, which makes them not only unique because of their friendship, but unique in terms of the way that they think and the way they spend their time. It really gives a sense of ranch life. The fact that they moved around ranches, went from ranch to ranch, and did not move up in the world, did not raise their status or hierarchy, because they simply spent their money on things that were not going to be of any use to them. We get to page 58, and Steinbeck establishes that Candy is still very upset by the fact that he faced the wall. And it suggests that sort of idea that Candy is very lonely, not only upset because of the death of his dog, but really establishes his sense of being useless, of not having a purpose and being lonely. It also, of course, suggests death and violence, because they've just shot the dog, and that's quite a violent thing to do. Oh, we have Curly at the end of 58, I forgot to mention him. He bursts into the room excitedly. It shows Curly's level of energy and frustration, which of course is important at the end of this section. Again, as soon as you've got description, you might want to have a look at words to see if you can think of any connotations, because you will get higher marks for it. So on page 59, we have Curly again. Curly jumped out of the door and banged it after him, again showing that sort of moment of tension by increasing the energy levels of this point in the story. It shows already that he is almost hyped up. I wouldn't use the term hyped up, it's too colloquial, but that's what's going on, and that is a reference to the end of this section. Lenny's childlike quality is shown in his dialogue. The beginning of page 60, he's showing his childlike quality in that dialogue, which is important to mention if you get that as a quote, as an extract, because you need to establish that you understand that. We've got a lot of short sentences here, all in the form of dialogue. As soon as you have a lot of dialogue like this, it increases the pace of the narrative. Narrative means story. As soon as that's happened, tension starts to build. So we know something is going to happen at the end of this section. So we move to page 61. And they're talking about sort of ranch life at this point, and it is also showing that George is unique not to be spending his dollars on this life that the ranchmen tend to have, which of course is going to a good whorehouse. What a quotation. Yes, awesome. And he's sort of saying that, you know, you don't mess around with other people's wives, and I guess going to a good whorehouse every time is a much better way of dealing with it. You know, that's a good mantra for life, people. But it just shows sort of that ranch life, and the fact that George is fairly unique, and the fact that he doesn't spend his money in that way. Now, all of this with the tension building and Curly coming in has clearly upset Lenny. And as soon as Lenny's upset, he goes to the thing that he wants to comfort him, and that is the focal dream. And he mentions the fat of the land and rabbits, which is comfort. It pacifies him. It makes him feel better. They start discussing it, and old Candy turns slowly over. It's a simple sentence because it's a short sentence, and it shows his interest. It shows that sort of peak of tension, but almost excitement rather than an anxious tension. And George starts describing the dream. Now, every time the dream is described, more detail is given, and that gives the dream more power because more and more information is being revealed. We have a bit of description as George is discussing the dream, and it says his voice was growing warmer, means that when George is talking about it, he is sort of the tone of his voice is changing, and it shows that it comforts George as much as it does Lenny. You know, warmer means something pleasant, something comforting, and I think it comforts George in times of strife as much as it does Lenny. We have lots of information here about the focal dream that has not been mentioned before. And here we have this sort of moment as the dream continues with George and Lenny, and it shows that George and Lenny really come together, really interact when the dream is being discussed. The fact that Lenny begs, "Talk about the house, George," it shows his enjoyment. He shares something with George, and it gives them both a way to escape their real life. It shows their sort of interacting, that unique friendship for 1930s America, which I have already discussed. So moving to page 64, we have George describing more and more of their focal dream, their ranch, their bit of land, and it's nostalgic for George. George is somebody who's clearly been on a farm at some point in his life, because he says, "When I was a kid." Nostalgic means when you look back at something fondly, and that's what he's doing, and perhaps that's why he wants the ranch as much as he wants somewhere for Lenny to be safe. This continues, and there's humour before tension. So what happens is Lenny is almost still thinking about the dream, and unlike George, who is able to cope in an adult world, when something happens he's able to, you know, switch off his mind and deal with it, whatever's happening. Lenny's still very much involved in the dream and thinking about the dream. And there's this amusing moment that Steinbeck writes where he's grumbling to himself, threatening the future cats which might dare to disturb the future rabbits. Obviously neither of those things exist yet, and he's almost making up a little scenario in his head, which is again very childlike but humorous. When Candy spoke, they both jumped. Now, overheard by Candy is the note I've written here, because Candy has heard all of this and has been listening. Not that they're very pleased about that when they first realise that Candy's been listening, but Candy suddenly seems to perk up because he realises that he can be of some use. He can provide financial security, which George and Lenny don't have. They don't have the money, but Candy does. And page 65 is where he describes this. He talks about how he was given money because he lost his hand right here on the ranch. And so therefore he's got a large sum of money. He wants to feel useful. He wants to have a purpose. And he gives them the option of taking this money. And the three of them start to discuss how they could manage to buy a piece of land. And that's really epitomised by the end where it says, "They fell into silence." That simple sentence shows that sort of excitement level, almost that they can't believe what is happening. And they looked at one another amazed. And this bit really is interesting because it is where Steinbeck shows that George believes this is a possibility. Jesus Christ, I bet we could swing her. This is the first time George has believed in the dream and it can become a reality. Also, the fact that the focal dream is shared between three people means that it is given more power because it's shared between more people. And then Candy describes the dog, and it shows that sort of fear, and it shows Candy's fear of being canned. And he says, "You've seen what they've done to my dog tonight. They say he wasn't no good to himself nor anybody else." when they can me here, I wished somebody shoot me. And he's sort of saying that, you know, he knows he's going to be useless. He knows that he will not be any good on the ranch, and he wants to find something where he has a purpose. And of course, the focal dream is it. So 67. This is a bit of an important page here. They make a plan. They're going to do it in 1 month. They're going to put their money together, the money that George and Candy and Lenny have earned in that month, and also the money from Candy. And it shows their excitement. It shows the sort of shared power in the dream now. Something you might want to mention, Lenny is still kind of talking. I'm not sure if he has a complete understanding of what's going on. It's interesting here that he copies the language that George used. I bet by Christ he likes it there, by Jesus. That's something that George would have said. And he copies the language, much like a child would. And I keep repeating these things because if you get this in an extract, it is important to mention, because the examiner doesn't know that you would know it in a different extract and you wouldn't know it in this extract. Candy mentions that he should have shot the dog himself, and it sort of shows his sense of responsibility. And of course, the whole thing changes when the door opened. Short sentence reflecting the tension. And Curly comes in. Slim comes in first, followed by Curly. Simple sentences which utterly change the mood. So here we go. 68. Curly is almost picked on at the start of 68, and it shows his weakness towards those who stand up to him. He won't fight back to those who stand up to him. And even when he whirls on Carlson and he tries to stand up to Carlson, you know, really reprimands him, "You goddamn punk." And it shows that Curly won't stand up to those who stand up to him. However, he does pick on the vulnerable. And the issue with this is Lenny is still smiling at the fact that he is thinking about the dream. Now, like I said before, George is able to really cut off from what is going on and deal with the situation as any adult would. Lenny is not like a normal adult. He struggles, and to protect himself, he is simply still in his dream world of thinking about the ranch that he and George will own and the rabbits, and he's simply happy by that. This, of course, makes Curly mad. And what's interesting here is we have a bit of description, and of course with description we look for writing techniques or connotations. Curly stepped over to Lenny like a terrier. Curly is the only person other than Lenny that Steinbeck describes animalistically. This is a simile. It shows that animalistic quality, almost as if the instinct cannot be controlled with Curly. And that is followed by the short sentence, the simple sentence, then Curly's rage exploded. That is a metaphor, but shows his lack of control. Exploded suggests a sense of danger. Those are some of the connotations. It shows sort of the extreme reaction, and he cannot control himself. Page 69. Simple sentences are used in this section to create the tension and almost to pick up the pace of the narrative. Lenny gave a cry of terror. It shows how vulnerable he is. It shows his fear. It shows that the fact that he does not immediately defend himself, that actually Lenny is not a violent person despite being punched in the face repeatedly by Curly. Really cute, and again, don't use the word cute. I know I'm using it, but don't you use it in your essay, but it is really cute. Lenny covered his face with his huge paws and bleated with terror. That is a metaphor. Again, as soon as you've got description, you look for writing techniques or connotations of words. Bleated connotations of sort of something like a sheep sound, so almost perhaps unrecognisable in terms of words, but suggests a level of fear. Huge paws. That metaphor suggests that he's animalistic, but almost gives a sense of vulnerability and innocence. He is not fighting back. However, this whole idea of Lenny reacting to instructions is shown when George shouts, "Get him, Lenny!" and it shows that sort of parental quality of George telling him what to do. He responds to George, and he pretty much flattens Curly. Hurrah, we all cheer. We don't like Curly, so we don't really care. Actually, we do care, but we don't promote violence. There we go, there's the teacher side. But that's the whole point, that Steinbeck doesn't really want you to like Curly in any way, shape or form. So I refer to my first point of hurrah, he got punched in the face. So we have a lovely simile here. Curly was flopping like a fish. Again, using something animalistic to show Lenny's strength this time. And it is something that is repeated in section 5 when Curly's wife is killed by Lenny. And it shows Lenny's strength. Towards the end of page 69, it describes Lenny's injuries. Steinbeck says, Lenny's face, one of his eyes was cut and closed. You've got that alliteration there, because again, as soon as you've got description, you should be looking for writing techniques or connotations of words. Cut and closed, harsh sound suggesting the atmosphere and the unpleasant action that has taken place. Obviously, Lenny cannot let go. He has responded to George's instructions, but he has not been able to let go and is pretty much crushing the heck out of Curly. Ha ha! But Lenny's strength is, of course, a cataphoric reference. But we see it through section 1 and then section 3, then section 5, and then he's died in section 6. So that's that, really. At the top of page 70, Lenny's paw is re-mentioned, animalistic, and shows that he works on instinct. It's also a metaphor. Again, we've got a bit of description further down, page 70. Suddenly, Lenny let go of his hold. He crouched, cowering against the wall. Again, we've got alliteration, see. And again, a quite harsh sound, crouched, cowering, suggesting that sense of foreboding and fear. He gets very upset, which is empathetic, and Steinbeck does that deliberately because it shows Lenny's fear and the way that Lenny struggles in the adult world. Slim and the men do not blame Lenny. It has already been established that Lenny is a nice guy, quoted by Slim, I think in George as well, but they are not fans of Curly in any way. However, they are concerned about how much damage Lenny has managed to cause, and that's shown by the by Jesus, he ain't hardly got no hand left. That's Slim talking about that, and he's talking about Curly's hand there. At the bottom of page 70, it shows the men protecting Lenny. They make sure that Curly is going to say that he got his hand caught in a machine and not that Lenny hurt his hand, because obviously then Lenny will get the sack. And so it is the men, specifically Slim, who, you know, is kind to other people, does look after other people, does look out for other people, which is unusual in 1930s America, but it shows him standing by Lenny. Page 71, at the top, Curly avoids looking at Lenny, mainly because it's sort of his pride. It shows his fear. Perhaps he shouldn't pick on someone he thought was vulnerable. Slim says this line, Christ almighty, I hate to have you mad at me, almost amusingly, but actually it's a real sort of suggestion of Lenny's strength and quite how much damage Lenny can cause. Bit further down, George makes sure that Lenny realises he wasn't his fault and that actually he was only doing as he instructed him to do. And it shows that Lenny's not worried about the pain he might be in from, you know, obviously Curly slugging him multiple times, which means punching him in the face. And he smiled with his bruised mouth, and he's happy that George is not displeased with him, even though he might be in pain with his injuries. Oh, bless him. He only really cares what George thinks. And at the end of the section, which is on page 72, we have this dialogue. Now, this is quite unusual for Steinbeck. He usually finishes on cinematic techniques, and he doesn't do it here. Dialogue increases the pace and emphasises the violent action, as well as George and Lenny's parent and child relationship and their unique friendship. And remember, that bit you can reference to 1930s America and how it was unique, because generally every man was for himself, and George and Lenny look out for each other, much in the same way that Slim is looking out for George and Lenny as well. And that is the end of section 3. Hurrah!